Hi everyone, my name is Erica Bonsack, and this is my analysis on the crisis speech. I chose to do my analysis on George W. Bush's speech after the attacks on September 11th on the Trade Center in New York, as well as the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. I chose to do this speech because this is an event that I remember taking place. I remember sitting in my third grade classroom, and we took some time off to kind of talk about what was going on and to watch the news. And we also took a moment of silence to remember all the lives that were lost that day. There were many people that lost their lives, and these people were mothers and fathers and secretaries and businessmen and firemen and just so many people lost their lives, and this is why this speech was so important, because many people were affected by something so negative. So the reason that this is a crisis speech is because there are three main constitutes which make a crisis speech, and these ideas include exigence, audience, and constraints. And throughout Bush's speech, he talks about all three of these main ideas. So just a little bit of background. The attacks on the World Trade Center took place and the Pentagon took place on September 11th, and later that evening, Bush delivered his speech to America as a whole from the Oval Office in Washington, D.C. There were 19 militants associated with the Islamic extremist group Al-Qaeda, and they hijacked 4 airlines and carried out suicide attacks against targets in the United States. 2 of the planes were flown into the World Trade Centers. One was flown to Washington, D.C. to the Pentagon, and the last one went into a field in Pennsylvania. Due to this catastrophic event, there is an extensive amount of destruction in the United States, as well as an extensive amount of death that took place. The individuals who were accused were people from the Islamic group Al-Qaeda. There were over 3,000 people that day that had lost their lives between all the attacks, and within these 3,000 people, there were over 400 firefighters who had lost their lives as well. When Bush gave his speech, he was really talking to America as a whole, and he was talking to anyone who had lost their life, or who had someone that maybe had lost their lives that day, and just everyone as a whole, to explain to them what was going to happen now. Bush starts his speech and he says, "Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist attacks. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women, and military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by despicable acts of terror." Bush kind of talks about how our freedom has been attacked, and because of the attacks, as I mentioned before, many people lost their lives. And as Bush's job as the president at this time, it was kind of his job to address the nation on what had happened earlier that day. These were acts of murder that were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and crisis. But because America is so strong, I believe that no matter what we have thrown at us, no one will be able to take us down, even through the most catastrophic events. So now I'm going to begin to talk about the 3 ideas that make a crisis speech a crisis speech. So I'm going to begin with exigence. This is something or an event that takes place that no one could help stop. So this exigent is not rhetorical in the case that the situation really couldn't be changed or prevented. I found a article online from the History Channel, and I'm just going to read a little something from there. This is kind of how it started. On September 11th, 2001, at 8:45 on a clear Tuesday morning, an American Airlines Boeing 767 loaded with 20,000 gallons of jet fuel crashed into the tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. So due to the crash, there was a huge, large hole about the 80th floor of the first skyscraper, which was 110 floors total. The crash killed people instantly and left many people in evacuation mode. And obviously, many of the floors above, people weren't able to get out. Less than 18 minutes later, the second flight made its way into the south tower of the World Trade Center. It hit near the 60th floor. The two collisions together caused massive explosions and caused debris and flames to land all over the surrounding streets below. The situation most likely could not have been changed at the time. America didn't know that something like this was going to happen, and there really would have been no way to prevent it from happening unless we made our airlines security better at the time. There were pictures of planes flying into buildings. There were fires burning, huge structures collapsing, and this kind of fills America's hearts with disbelief and sadness, and even some anger. Although American citizens had no idea that this was going to take place, it was clear that something like this was planned much ahead of time. So the second concept that I'm going to talk about is the audience, and it is very clear that this speech had a large audience. I wouldn't doubt that 90% of the people in the United States at the time were watching this speech because it is such a huge and catastrophic event. As I mentioned earlier, there were over 3,000 people who had lost their lives, and Bush really tries to reach out to the friends and family of those who had lost their lives, but he also reaches out to America as a whole to ensure that he knows that everyone knows that they are kind of going through these catastrophic events, and he's going to do all that he can to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again. Bush really tries to connect with the audience as a whole, and he really tries to involve everyone in one way or another. He tells America that the United States emergency response plans are going to come into play, and he will be doing something about the devastating situation. Bush states in his speech, immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. So he kind of tells the audience that his first priorities are those who have been injured or hurt by the attacks. He also lets his audience know that he is going to do all in his power to protect America from future attacks. One thing that I found interesting and personally I liked is that Bush asked for prayers from the audience. He states in his speech, tonight I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, and for those whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. I believe throughout his entire speech, he really tries to incorporate everyone into his speech, whether they were personally affected by the event or not. So the last concept is constraints. We'll never really know why New York and Washington, D.C. was attacked by the terrorists. Our country is a free country, and many other countries are not like ours. As Bush stated, we are a country with the most freedom and opportunity in the world. Another idea that I found on the History channel was one of the main reasons that Al-Qaeda group of terrorists from Saudi Arabia and other several nations attacked the United States was due to the fact that America was not in support of Israel and its involvement in the Gulf War or its military presence in the Middle East. Osama bin Laden was running Al-Qaeda, the terrorist group at the time, and Bush ensured he would do all in his power to find the people who were involved in the crisis. He claims the search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts, and I've directed the full resources for our intelligence and law enforcement communities for those responsible to bring them to justice. We see here that the main reason that the United States was attacked was because of motives and the motives that they had at the time. So because the United States was disagreeing with the ways that things were going in the Middle East, the terrorist group retaliated against us. In his speech, Bush uses artistic proofs in order to explain his audience the virtue behind the situation that takes place. He explains the definition as to what happened, the circumstance of the situation, and the way we are going to act towards the situation. So to conclude, it's very clear that the speech given by Bush on September 11th was a crisis speech. There are three main constituents, which included exigence, audience, and constraints, all in which played a role in his speech and explained why Bush's speech was in the crisis category. It was clear that the American society was not expecting this to happen, and it is something that we really couldn't have prevented from happening unless we had more information on the situation at the time. Bush really wanted to address all of his audience members, each in a different way. The crisis was intentional by the terrorists that committed this horrendous act. As a country, though, we are able to stand strong together, and we are able to get through even the hardest of times.